Guys, welcome back. It is your favorite Gimp with a Limp, and I'm here with a special treat for you all. I have, and this is going to hopefully come out correctly. My southern won't mess up too much. Khalkin Gull. This is by Princeps Games. This is a prototype copy, so not production. And this is kind of like the sequel, the follow-on to Freezing Inferno. So if you've seen or played Freezing Inferno before, then you will know what I am showing you guys here. You'll have some prior experience. So what we're going to do, since this is a prototype copies, I want to kind of give you the basics, the highlights of the game. Show you the components. Understand that these are prototype components, so nothing that you're seeing is finalized, but it's in the ballpark. It's close to what you're going to see in your final version of the game. And then we're going to go over the basics of how the game is going to be played. All right, so first let's take a look at the components, and then we'll go over the basics of the game itself. So when it comes to the map itself, if you'll remember, when they did Freezing Inferno, they had some interesting discussions, should we say, about the map, because some people liked it, some people didn't. I really liked it. I thought it was a good-looking map for Freezing Inferno, and they ended up doing a double-sided map because some people had liked it, some people didn't. So they gave people two options. I like that. They are going with that again here. And since this is printed in such a way that I can't do it, I was going to do half one side, half the other, but it's not printed in a way that I can actually line it up on the board. Doing that, I'll throw a picture on screen so you can see what the flip side of this looks like. To me, that really invokes that older wargaming feel, you know, ASL type maps, things like that. So if you like that style of map, you can go with that. Me personally, I prefer this one that looks a little more textured, has a not more realistic, but a little bit more flavor to it. So I prefer this side, but you will have a couple of options with this game like you did in the previous one. Now I've scooted it over to the side, but along one edge of the map, you will have a row of numbers that you will be able to keep track of things like how many fighters and bombers you have, how many production points that you have, or political points, I think they're called in this game. And you'll be able to keep track of all of those varying elements along one edge of the board. The other edge of the board is going to have a smaller but similar number track that will be used to keep track of what game turn it is. Besides that, you will have varying cards like your air superiority combat cards here that we will talk about here very soon. And just like in Freezing Inferno, there are a varying set of event cards as well that will come into play. And you'll notice these count 1 to 8, just like the number of rounds. You will pull one of these cards for each round of the game. There are multiples of each one. So I think there's 3 1s, 3 2s, 3 3s, and so on. That way it'll give each game a little bit of variety, as there will be different events that will occur throughout the course of your games. Lastly, when we're discussing the cards, there are an assortment of general cards. These cards are going to correlate to the HQs that you have on the board. So you see, for example, this general, not even going to try to pronounce it. Let's see, what, Rippy? We're going to go with Rippy. Is number 5, and there is a HQ counter 5, and it has the same skill on it. So tank level 3, that is his ability. There will be one of these cards for each one of the HQs, and when you initially set up your game, you will pick 3 to use during the course of your game. So besides those elements, you will also have an assortment of player aids, things like your action sequence. So this will give you the sequence of play, unit costs when you are doing production, and then on the flip side of this is your terrain effects chart, any modifiers that it does apply, and then the abbreviations, which I do appreciate when they take the time to do stuff like this, because most of us will understand most of these abbreviations, like a ZOC is a zone of control, but there are a few like TAV, it's your total attack value. It's nice that they put that on there so it's easy to remember. Besides that, we will also have a combat results table that we will touch on when we get into combat. We'll have a weather chart that can affect the course of our game. Here's our chart for keeping track of things like espionage and deception. There will be one of these for each faction, the Soviets and the Japanese, during the course of the game. And like that chart, you will also have an airbase chart for each faction. So the Soviets and the Japanese, again, that you can use to keep track of your air power during the game, and it gives you a chart that you will roll on for air superiority combat. Besides our player aids, we also do have an assortment of dice, and you'll notice there is a couple of D20s, a D8, and a D12 here. Well, you don't actually have D20s. Now, we will touch on this when we get into the combat section of the game, but in essence, this D8 is the same as these two D20s. They each only go to 8. It's the amount of numbers that are on these. This gives you varying results during the course of your game for combat. So if you just want a straight D8 system where each number is even to be rolled, you'll use the regular D8. But if you want to change those chances, in essence, give yourself a lesser chance to roll a 1 or an 8, for example, then you will use one of these varying dice. It is listed down in the rule book which ones give you what percentages, so you do have 3 choices when it comes to combat die on what you're going to roll. I do appreciate it when a publisher does give you choice like this, so it's not just a straight D8 system. If you want to change things up and make it to where it's rare to roll that critical hit or critical failure, you do have an option to roll a dice that will give you that type of result. So for example, this blue one here only has a single 1 and a single 8 on the other side, even though this is a D20, and then varying numbers on the rest of the facets of the die. Okay, lastly, when we start talking about the components of the game, at least the components that I have currently, we have our little mini maps that allow us to do a secret deployment. So this can come into play during the setup of the game if you're playing a heads-up game. If you're playing it solitaire like I would be, I'm not going to use these because I can't hide it from myself. But if you line these two charts up, all right, let me see if I can get it just right there. See how they kind of notch into each other a little bit, right? Looking at there at the top. This correlates to that Khalkin River that runs along roughly the center of the map. It tears the map in kind of a third and 2/3 over here on the Japanese side. That's your delineating marker, and when you're doing your setup, units will set up either on the left for the Soviets or the right for the Japanese, and they can't be within 3 hexes of the Khalkin River. You will use these pads to write down your deployments, and besides the secret deployment, you do have an option to do dug-in units as well that will remain secret, because once you have finished your setup, you will alternate, or you can alternate rather, going back and forth deploying units to the board, but there is an option to essentially dig in a unit that will remain hidden through a portion of the game, and certain game elements can cause that unit to be exposed, like when an enemy unit encroaches upon it. All right, so what is the purpose of our game? What are we trying to do here? Well, this conflict between the Soviets and the Japanese is after certain neutral ground, contested ground here in the center that they are going to war over. In the previous one, we had one faction that was coming across the board trying to capture 3 cities on the enemy side of the board. Here, that does come into play, but your main conflict is going to be throughout the center of this board, where you see these white flags. These symbolize contested control points, checkpoints, that you're going to try to take control of. Now, when the game initially is set up, all of these white points will be held by the Japanese. But as the Soviet units come in, they will take control of these points, and that will pull production points from the Japanese and give them to the Soviets. Both sides do start, though, with some areas in their inherent control besides our contested white points in the center. For the Japanese, we have yellow ones over here on the right, and for the Soviets, we have red ones here on the left. So each faction is going to have a single main point, their main base, their main checkpoint. For the Japanese, it's going to be this location, Nomonhan, right there, Nomonhan. It is worth 3 points, but At any point, if the Soviets capture this checkpoint and hold it to the end of their turn, they will essentially win the game. Excuse me, not hold it to the end of their turn, hold it to the beginning of their next turn. So the Japanese do have a single turn to try and retake the city. The Japanese have the same type of target over here on the far left corner. So Nomonhan is on the upper right end of the board, and this city, we're just going to call it Bullock, is in the bottom left corner of the map. It's worth 6 points, and again, the same victory condition. If the Japanese hold it to the beginning of their next turn, they automatically win the game. Now, besides the 2 auto wins, right, so the 2 victory cities, the Soviets' goal is to gain control of at least 5 of the 9 white control points here in the center, because there's 9 of these. If they can gain control of 5 of them while holding at least 4 of their red cities. Now, they have 6 total, but they need to retain at least control of 4 of them. So 5 of these and 4 of these will equal a Soviet win. If they have not done that by the 8th round, then the Japanese are the winners. All right, so let's go over the basic action sequence, and that will give you a good idea of how the game's going to be played. Your initial operations here at the top is basically your setup. So players put their markers on the PPC. That's essentially controlling our checkpoints. The Japanese will start with control of all the white ones, like I said, and your starting points are going to be 26 for the Soviets and 25 for the Japanese. The Soviets, with only 6 cities, do have 26 points. Their initial cities have a higher starting value. The Japanese control points are a little more spread out and of lower values. Their highest value is a 3, while the Soviets have a couple of 6s on their side. So besides that, taking the appropriate number of units from the box, that's just setting up your units, placing the mini-map, so drawing in your secret deployment, the deck of calendar cards, which we had just discussed here. These are the calendar cards that you're going to use to create your event deck. After that, you're going to do your initial weather conditions and the tactical progress boards. Remember, those tactical progress boards are the deception and espionage boards. Now, with the exception of round 1, the rest of the rounds all take place in the same way. So the initial round will be done differently than the subsequent rounds. Now, one of the main differences there is the fact that some of the rounds here, you will be producing units. Not every round, but some of the rounds, you will be producing units. In all of the rounds, you will start by drawing a calendar card and then do your air superiority phase. All right, so when it comes to your air superiority phase, it's fairly abstracted. You're not going to have actual air units on the board here. Instead, there's a phase where you're going to do a contested combat, and that's mainly going to be based on your air-based strength, which will start up here at 7, and whatever card you choose to use. These cards are numbered 0 through 8. And what each player will do will be secretly select a card, place it down, and then they'll reveal the card, and that is added to whatever your air-based strength is at the time. So it is a little wonky when it comes to the cards in the fact that there are more cards than there are rounds, okay? That gives each player the ability to one time set down a different card. But once you've done that, you can't do it again for the remainder of the game. After that, you'll only be able to pick one specific card, lay it face down, and contest it against your opponent. What's going to happen is whatever the number of your card is, either that 0 through 8, will be added to your base air strength, and that'll give you a total. You'll compare it against your opponent, and whoever is higher is going to win that air combat and have superiority. If you tie, then it's considered a draw, and both players are going to lose a fighter. If one player wins, that player wins the air superiority, the other player has to lose one of the fighters that they have in their inventory. With the air superiority, you can either gain a bonus to the upcoming combat phase. This is only from round 2 and on, but you can use it to gain a +1 to combat. Essentially, you have aircraft coming in, doing ground to air, and supporting your combat. So you either get that bonus or you can choose to attack your opponent's air strength. So try to reduce the strength of their air bases, which will reduce the amount of aircraft they can have in total and reduce the amount of strength they have for the air superiority conflict. That's where your bombers are going to come into play, and then that strength is going to get compared to your anti-aircraft power, which both players do start with 3, and again, the air base strength. It's a series of contested rolls to determine who has. Air combat itself is fairly abstracted in the way that it's going to be taking place, because most of it is done off board, and you're either trying to reduce your opponent's air strength or gaining a bonus that you can use in the ground combat phase. And yes, during the course of the game, you do have the ability to buy new things like fighters and bombers to help support you in that air superiority phase. Now, once you have finished your air combat, that's when you're going to get into the ground combat, the movement, and all that other good stuff. It will always start with the Soviet player. So the Soviet player will always go first, and then the Japanese player is going to go. Doesn't matter what round you're in. You'll do any actions you're going to do with your units, and then afterwards you'll adjust any production points. So capturing different checkpoints around the board will gain you more points or lose you points if you lose control of different checkpoints. And then after your turn is done, so after the Soviets have done everything they're going to do with their ground units, then they get those points that they can spend later on in production phases. So production can be done on the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 8th round, and you can either use it to increase the strength of units already on the board up to 5. No unit can go above 5. Or to produce new units that are going to come onto the board. All right, so the meat and potatoes, the ground combat itself, how's that going to work? Well, if you played Freezing Inferno, like I said, you should have a good idea of how it's going to work here. Now, when the game starts, like I said, you're not going to have any units on the opposite side, your opponent's side of the Khalkin River. I've just thrown some over here to use for example purposes, but as the game progresses, you will either have to come to one of the fjords that are here at the river to cross, or build a bridge. Now, they didn't have a bridge counter, so I printed one off to use as an example, but the counters for the bridges will look something like this here. Each side will have a limited number of bridges that they can use. So Japanese crossing to attack the Soviets, Soviets crossing to attack the Japanese, and so on. So when you're conducting your combat, you're going to have different types of units. You're going to have your HQ that we already talked about. Tanks, artillery, infantry, and even cavalry are in the game as well. Now, one of the things you need to make sure you do is you keep your units within the range of an HQ. They have to have an unobstructed range of 6 to an HQ. There are zones of control around enemy units, so your line of communications, your line of supply cannot pass through an enemy zone of control. As long as you're within 6 hexes of a friendly HQ, though, you will be considered in supply. Obviously, ones that are out of supply will be marked as such and take penalties to their combat. Besides providing supply, HQ units do have a couple of other neat things that they can do. One of the things they can't do is combat. We'll notice that they do not have a combat value up in their upper left like the rest of the units do, but they do have the ability to provide one unit of their type with a bonus. So as an example here, this Soviet HQ is a tank type. It can provide one, just a singular unit with a bonus. So we see here, this tank has the little metal icon in its upper left underneath its combat factor, okay? That means that when this unit attacks, it can't roll below whatever the number is here on the HQ value. That can be either 2, 3, or 4. You'll be able to pick your HQs when you start out. Like I said, you get 3 of them, but their total strength can't be above 9. So you can either pick 3, 3, and 3, or a 4, 3, and a 2, or so on, as long as you don't go over 9 on the total values for your HQs. But that type can provide a bonus. So this HQ is a tank. It will provide the bonus just to this singular unit. You do use the unit that has the medal to designate which unit is gaining that bonus. We see over here is the artillery type for the Japanese, so this unit would gain that bonus. So if it rolled to attack, if it rolled a 1, it would be counted as a 3 instead. When it comes to the units, they're easy to understand. The upper left is going to be their attack value, the upper right is their defensive value, and the lower left is going to tell us what their movement point is. The only other factor is something like artillery. We see this says 4H. That means it has a range of 4 hexes. It can attack up to 4 hexes out. The rest of these infantry, infantry, tanks, and horses have to be adjacent to conduct their attacks, but artillery can lob some shells in against their enemy. When it comes to your movement, there is your terrain effects chart. It'll tell you how much it costs for different points across the board. 3 movement points, 4, 4, 3, just depending on what type of terrain you are crossing. And of course, some of it, like the Khalkin River, is impassable. Do keep in mind there is a smaller river, this Holstein River here. This one is crossable. So you can cross this river, but just not this one. So combat itself is actually fairly streamlined and straightforward. Let's say our infantry here had activated and moved forward. They got into the zone of control of this enemy tank. That means they're going to stop. They do have to stop when you get in an enemy zone of control. When you are in an enemy zone of control, you can move out of it if it's the start of your activation, or you can move to another hex in their zone of control. It's the usual type of zone of control rules that you would see. But if you're moving along and you enter that enemy zone of control, that means your movement is going to stop. So let's say our infantry here, we're attacking these tanks. What you're going to do is add their attack value to their strength to get their total attack value. And then same thing with our defensive unit, add their defensive value to their strength, and then any modifiers to determine what your odd ratio are going to be for the combat results table. So we have a stack of 5 here, and we have 2 here. Remember, in this game, it is not a unit per counter. It's a single stack is a unit, and their strength increases with more counters. So this is a strength 5 infantry, and this is a strength 2 tank. They can split up, so you can split apart units to create 2 separate units that are moving on their own and acting independently, but you can't break off singles. So you can't break them off in numbers smaller than 2. But for example, let's say our Japanese here, they had broke off this group of 2. If they were reinforcing, they could reinforce this one back up to 5 and this one back up to 5. So back to our combat here, that means we have 2 plus the 5 gives us a 7, and then the 2 plus the 4 gives us a total of 6. So their total attack value is 7, and their total defensive value is a 6. When we look at our combat results table, thankfully, thank God they did this. They have all the damn numbers across here because I hate having to do the math to break it down when you get into some weird fractions. But you see right here, 7 to 6, boom. And you would roll on this chart, and then any modifiers. In this case, this is a clear terrain hex, so there would be no modifiers would be applied. When we're looking at our combat results table, numbers to the left side of the slash are the damage that is done to the attackers, and numbers to the right, or letters, are what's done to the defenders. You'll see that there are certain things like DR, of course, that's defender retreat. That Nantes is no offense next turn. So if a unit gets marked with that, it means their next turn they don't get to do any attacking. They've been kind of shaken up. Besides that, there is something that is kind of cool that I like on here, and that's CA, that's counterattack. It means the defenders get to attack back if they want to against the attacking unit. Now that can only happen once. So if our infantry attacked these tanks and the tanks got a CA, so counterattack, and they attacked back, these infantry could not then get a CA result and attack them back. It's only one. You can't end up in a chain going back and forth forever. Then all it is simply applying whatever number it is as damage to the strength value. So if it was a 1 on the right side, we would just remove a single tank here. If there was a 2 on the left side of the slash, then we'd remove 2 infantry from the attackers. So the side that loses does have to retreat. If it's our attackers, they'll go back to their original hex. If it's the defenders and there's still defenders left, they'll have to move back, and the attackers obviously will take control of the hex that they were located in. When it comes to retreating, the rules are pretty standard. You do have to retreat away from the attacking unit, not into enemy zones of control if it can be helped. You can take extra losses or even be eliminated if you can't retreat away from the combat. Once all the Soviets have performed their action, then the Japanese will have their turn to perform their actions, try to take checkpoints, try to cross the river and take away the Soviet checkpoints. It will go back and forth. So like I said, once the Soviets have taken their actions and are complete with their units, then it'll go to the Japanese turn, and they'll do the same thing, attacking Soviet units, trying to take checkpoints, increase their production points, and all that good stuff. Just me personally, once you've activated a unit, just to keep it in mind, I would either turn them to the side or mark them with a bead or something like that, just to remember that you have activated a unit, because remember, this will spread all the way across the map. Besides that, like I said, you do have your espionage deception board. These will give you certain bonuses if you put production points towards this. This will allow you to re-roll your opponent's die. This will allow you to retreat from a combat, so not have to engage in that combat if you don't want to. But as you use these bonuses, once you use it, you kind of lose it, and then you have to spend more points to get more of these throughout the game. But that is the basic gist of how Khalkin Gul is going to play out. I have to say, for me, I am excited with what I've seen so far. I do like it. I like how we are fighting over this river here. I liked the original concept when it came to Freezing Inferno, of trying to take certain points across the board and what direction you were going to attack. And you have that same premise here in this game, in the effect that, are you going to try to gain mass control points, or are you going to try to just bull your way into that one victory city to go ahead and win it? So in essence, your opponent can't really know what your battle plan is. Are you going to put a feint, like try to gain a couple of control points up here and then make an end run for their city as quickly as possible? Or are you just putting some units in that direction while you're secretly trying to get as many of these control points so you can win your victory that way? There are multiple ways to win and lose this game, and that is something that I do like to see. And I think the river here provides an interesting aspect to the combat, in the fact that it's kind of like this wall down the middle of the map, or roughly the middle of the map, that is going to prevent units from moving across it, except in very specific spots, which is going to focus in the combat. Yeah, there are some fords here on the map where you can cross, so of course you want to defend those, but you can't just leave the rest of it empty, because the enemy is going to have the ability to put down a bridge, and you don't want to have an open area where suddenly the enemy lays in a bridge and they just gut right into the center of you. FYI, these are considered hills. They are crossable. Units can go across these. This is not mountainous terrain. Considered hills, so the enemy can go across these. Don't think of this as impassable. The look of them had that like mountainous look, and I was originally thinking like, oh, okay, you can't cross these. Like, no, yeah, you can cross these. Obviously, I did like in Freezing Inferno the way that the units work with the stacks, affecting the strength points, the ability to split those off if you want to, or concentrate your forces. I always did like that aspect of it, and now with the HQs being able to provide a little bit of a bonus to a unit, that means you have that one unit you can get just that little bit more punch with, and the enemy is going to have to worry about that. And that being divided out, because you do have to have an artillery, a tank, and an infantry HQ. You can't just mob up one type of HQ and like go tank heavier or something like that. You have to have all three across the board, but it does put some interesting choices because your specialist artillery, are you going to put them north? You're going to put them middle? You're going to put them south? Where are you going to put them? And that's going to make your opponent have to worry about how they're going to counter where you're placing certain types of units, because it's going to behoove you to have, your good infantry unit next to your or near your good infantry HQ. Same with the tank, same with the artillery. I like the fact that they gave us two options on the maps. Again, I like this side better than the other one, but some old school gamers might like the other side better than this one. It is up to you, and that's just purely aesthetics, but I do appreciate that they are giving people that option. Also, I think the custom dice are a excellent inclusion. I love being able to have different odds when it comes to it. The straight D8 is just going to give you a straight even game. Doesn't matter, all the numbers have the same chance, but hey, maybe you want to have more control over it and you have a couple of dice you can use to have that level of control. That reminds me of Conflict of Heroes with their custom dice that they brought into the game. Same principle that we have here. Really, my only niggle with it is I have to say that I think the air superiority is a little fiddly. I think having it off map is understandable because it's hard to have air represented in game, but the way that this works, I think there's a lot of upkeep involved with this for not a whole lot of gameplay effect. The modifier is only +1 that you get for the attack using the aircraft, right? So your ground attack, you're getting just a +1. That's it. It's not a huge bonus. So the amount of upkeep and potential points you might spend towards this, or worrying about the back and forth, it's not really a whole lot for all the effort that you're putting into it. Some people might feel differently, but I probably would have preferred just to have a handful of aircraft that I could put directly on the map and use them to come in to do bombing runs or strafing runs or something of that nature. But if they had gone that route, then they would have had to have made counters for those, counters for the AA units, because you would have to have AA units on the board as well. So I kind of understand why they abstracted it out a little bit, but not my cup of tea. Last aspect I'll touch on is the secret deployments that you're going to have with these. I think that is a good inclusion for people who are going to be playing it heads up. Obviously, for your solitaire player, we're not going to get any use out of that. But for people who do play it heads up, your strategy is going to come from that. That initial deployment is going to have huge swings on how your game's going to play out. And then having a few units that get to stay hidden. So maybe you've got something near one of those victory point cities that you've got dug in that your enemy doesn't know about, and they're making this push and they're almost to your city. And then boom, all of a sudden they run into a full strength 5 tank that's been dug in and ready to go to war and defend the city. And right when victory was in their grasp, it's taken from them. I think that's a great inclusion for those who are going to be playing it heads up. But all right, that is going to be it for me. I hope you have enjoyed this preview of Khalkin. It is coming to Kickstarter October the 11th, I believe. I'll annotate it below if I'm wrong, but I think it's the 11th or 12th is the date that it is coming to Kickstarter. So make sure and mark your counters. Mark your counters, yeah. And stay tuned. If you did like Freezing Inferno, I can guarantee you're going to like Khalkin, so you want to jump onto this one as well. But all right, that's going to be it for me. You guys take care, and I will catch you in the next one.